Good morning, everyone. This is our GAFE Session 2, Google Apps for Education, Hangout on Air. Today we're going to be covering domain audits. I'm just going to give it another minute or two to see if some more people log on. But for right now, anyone who's with us, if you can, please go to that bit.ly link that you see on your screen. It's bit.ly/GAFE Session 2. This is just a short slideshow that we're providing you that has a link to the domain audits that we're going to cover today. And let it be clear that we're not going to go through our entire domain audit today, but we're just going to hit some of the major points. And I'm going to show you kind of a bit of what the admin console will look like when you're going through the domain audit on your own. Okay, everyone. Now, if you see in the showcase on the right-hand side of your screen, you should be able to see a link to the CS Domain Audit tool. This is going to prompt you to make a copy. This tool is a copy that it's for you all to use at your leisure. The way that the domain audit is set up is it is a self-paced tool. You should be able to go through it whenever you have a few seconds, and we'll go, I believe we'll start right now. So again, you should have the link to make a copy of the domain audit tool for yourself. I suggest when it prompts you to make a copy, that you make the copy and you retitle it. So if you're in the domain audit tool, at the top right left-hand side of your screen, it should let you click in here. Yours will say copy of, and that's fine, but you're going to want to retitle it something that you all will remember. So let's say my school, something like that. All right, so now if we go back to our slideshow, and again, for our slideshow, the bit.ly link for that is bit.ly/GAFE Session 2. So right now, what we're going to cover this morning is our self-paced domain audit. And if you guys didn't get that link through the showcase option of the video, you should be able to click on it through this slide deck if you open the slide deck in another window. So this domain audit tool, like I said, is designed as a self-paced audit of the security state of your school's domain. You must have super admin access to your domain in order to complete this audit. How do you know if you're a domain super admin? If you're inside of our slide deck, you can click into this link where we provide you with info on how to know whether or not you're a super admin. So if you're a super admin, you should be able to see this little gear icon in the top right-hand side of your screen when you're in your Google account, or you can go to admin.google.com and you should be able to see it there. So back to our regular slide deck. In our domain audit tool, the instructions are included on the first tab of the tool. Anything with a yellow background is a knowledge check, while those with an orange background require you to take action on something inside of your domain. And purple checkpoints are elementary school specific. If you only have a limited amount of time to go through your domain audit, we suggest that you filter for anything that is marked high priority, and we will go through that as we're looking at our domain audit. So right now I'm going to switch out of our slide deck and into the actual audit tool. So when we're in our actual audit tool, you should see that on your first tab it says README. This first tab of the spreadsheet is a list of instructions for you. First and foremost, we provide you with a link to the admin panel. So that's admin.google.com, or like I just said, you can click on that gear icon when you're in any of your Google apps. So see that gear icon is there. This is what your admin console looks like, and this is something that we'll be referring back to as we go through our Hangout today, just to touch on some major checkpoints. Back to our audit tool. Column A gives us the different audit finding categories. So each column in our audit tool is a different category, and here we give you each category and then the explanation. So column A of our tool is always a checkpoint. Column B is the status of said checkpoint. Column C are any findings that you might have while you're going through the audit. Column E is a quick link. F is the name of the topic or admin panel section, and G is the subsection. And again, we'll go through these columns more in depth once we look at the actual tool. Over here, we have checkpoint color codings. So like I said earlier, we've color coded a lot of our checkpoints to make it easier for you all. Anything in yellow is a knowledge check, and that means you don't necessarily need to be inside of your admin panel in order to kind of check this off. Orange items are action items that are for both secondary and elementary schools, and purple checkpoints are elementary school specific. If you notice on our spreadsheet, you can see that the next tab next to README says Audit Checks Secondary School Focused, and that is colored in the orange shade. And then next to that is Audit Checks Elementary School Focused, and that's purple. So depending on the type of school that you're in, you're either going to want to complete the Secondary School Focused, which is for 6 through 12, or the Elementary School Focused, which is for pre-K or K through 5th or 6th. And finally, we have this additional resources tab all the way at the end. This is something that you're going to want to check on if you have some time. Oh, excuse me. Moving everything around. This additional resources tab is something you're going to want to check on. We provide you with a bunch of topics and then some resource URLs, which can be very useful for you moving forward in the security audit of your domain. So we have some Google Apps resources, a video about Google Vault, a link to the New Visions CloudLab, which again is where I work, some GAFE FAQs, and then some Google admin support help. So right now we're going to go ahead and go into the actual audit. We're going to start to look over the different checkpoints in the audit so that you all can get familiar with what the audit will look like and the different things it's going to ask you for and the information that it provides. So I'm going to look at the secondary school focus tab, but we will take a look briefly at the elementary school focus. And again, these two audits are very, very similar in that the elementary school one just has a bit more restrictions because you're dealing with younger students. Okay, so right now we're on our Audit Check Secondary School Focused tab. So we can see that column A is titled Checkpoint, and each of these rows 2 through, we go all the way down to 73, are all rows where it's telling us a different action item or a suggestion that you're going to want to make sure is in place for your school's domain. So like we said earlier, all the things that are in yellow are knowledge checks. So we can see that item 2 is note location for Google Apps customer support PIN and phone numbers. So again, this isn't anything that you can necessarily take action on, but you are going to want to know where you can find that Google support phone number within your admin console. Right now for this checkpoint, column B, the status is not yet started because we haven't started this. And you can see that the status is a dropdown that's pre-populated with not yet started, completed, pending, completed but need to discuss with principal, not applicable, choosing a different policy, or needs follow-up. Column C, our findings column, is really useful for you all because it's a place where you can take notes and see what you're going to be doing for each of these checkpoints. So let's say for column 2, checkpoint 2, you don't know where the Google Apps phone number PIN is, but you don't have time to go check right now because class starts in 5 minutes. In your findings column, you can write need to follow up on, and you can change your status to pending. So you're leaving yourself a note that this is still pending because you need to find out where it is. Column D provides us with a quick link, if applicable, to the area within our admin console where we can find these different checkpoints. And then columns E and F provide us with the admin panel section and then the subsection, if necessary, of these items. So right now I can see for checklist item 2, I want to go to support, and it's in Google Apps. So I'm going to go over in my admin console for a second, and I'm going to look for support. So it should either be listed somewhere here, or if I click on the left-hand side on this hamburger menu, we call those 3 lines a hamburger menu, I should be able to find support in there. So let me find support, click on that, and under Google Apps, I see a phone number. So that's where I can find that phone number for the Google support help. You'll also want to notice that anytime you call Google support, you're going to want to click on this button that says Get PIN. It generates a PIN for you that is only valid for an hour, and it's just useful because it allows the people at Google to connect your domain with your phone call so that they know that you're the person that you say you are. So if we go back to our domain audit, we see that for this checkpoint 2, our priority is low, and column I is really, really useful for you all, especially when dealing with your principals or administrators, because it gives you the rationale behind our suggestion for this checkpoint. So our rationale for wanting to know where this Google support number is that you can't get Google support without a PIN. So even if you did know the number because you had it written on a Post-it by your desk, you'd still need to generate that PIN in order to get that support from Google that you need. So this column I is very, very useful when you're going through the checkpoints, because if you really don't understand something, column I gives you the rationale behind what we're suggesting. And then if you go over to column J, which we'll cover, some in-house training needs will be provided if we find that it's something that may be necessary. And then in column K, we provide you all with any helpful links that we may have found for any of these checkpoints. So let's go back to see if you notice each one of these checkpoints. These should be something that you want to go through in order because there's a logical progression through our checkpoints. But like we were saying earlier, if you only have, let's say, a half an hour today to focus on our audit, what we'll want to do is we want to filter by priority. So right now we have nothing filtered on our audit, but let's say I want to only look at my high priority items because I want to make sure that at the very least those are being taken care of and I've reviewed them well. So what I want to do, excuse me, in order to filter for priority, is I want to click on this little arrow here, and I'm going to clear my options and then only select high, because I only want to look at the high priority, and click OK. Now I'm only looking at my items that are high priority. And like I said, we really do want to go through the domain audit as a whole, but at the very least, you want to make sure you're touching on those high priority points. So let's look at line item 3, which is our first high priority item and another knowledge check because it's in yellow. This is, I know the difference between a group and an organizational unit. Now, this is a very, very important concept to understand when you're administering a Google domain. Very important, so much so that in our highlight deck that you all should have access to, I have provided you with a slide on the difference between organizational units and Google groups. So an organizational unit, or an OU as it may be called throughout the audit, is a subset of users in your domain upon which you can configure certain domain settings. Initially, when you set up your Google domain and you go into your admin console, all your users are placed into a single organizational unit, and that organizational unit is usually the name of your domain or the name of your school. All settings you make in the admin console apply to this top level organization and therefore to all users and devices under your account. To give different settings to groups of users or devices, you're going to want to create different organizational units beneath your top level organization. Then move users and devices to that sub-organization. So I know that this may sound very crazy, but we're going to take a look at what this means. So if I'm in my admin console, I want to go ahead and look at my users. Again, this is a test domain that's already been set up. When you guys start your domains, you're only going to have one organization. Here on our left-hand side, this is where you're going to find your organizational units. When you start, you're only going to have that one organization. It's going to be yourschool.org or yourschool.com, whatever you decide to name your domain. That's going to be your one organizational unit. As you go forward, if you notice when you hover over this, you see these 3 dots. If you click on that, it should let you add or edit. You either want to add a sub-organization or edit your organization. So right now we're not going to want to edit, we're going to add a sub-organization. So this is going to be a test OU. Now we just created that. Now if you see, we just opened up a whole bunch of different organizational units. So this UPD is our main organization, but if you notice underneath, we have a number of organizational units nested beneath that UPD. We have active students, alumni, former staff, P-credit course, staff, that test OU, which is the one that I just created, and transferred students. Organizational units are ways for you to organize your users within your domain, and it's very important to set these up correctly because it really helps you to manage and organize your domain in terms of different user settings. So for example, let's say we have all of our organizations, we have all of our users put into these organizations correctly, which is very simple to do if you're creating a new organization. All you need to do is drag and drop people into these organizational units. So let's take a look at an example of the use of an organizational unit. So let's say we want to go into apps. And I want to look at my Google Apps because that's really important. Right now I can see all of the different services I have under Google Apps and whether or not these are on for everyone. So let's say that I don't want my students to have access to contacts because I don't want my students seeing my teacher's contacts and vice versa. What I can do here is click on contacts. And then I want to, if you see that it says contacts on for everyone, what I want to do is click on these 3 little dots over here. These 3 little dots are always something that's going to allow you to edit settings. So we have on for everyone, off, or on for some organizations. So what I'm going to do right now is click on for some organizations, and this is going to allow me, now we see that these are all of the organizational units that we had just set up earlier. This is going to allow me to manage who has access to contacts at an organization setting. So it becomes that it's no longer all or nothing. It means that you can actively decide who has access to what in your domain, which is very, very useful when you're dealing with a domain in which you have students, staff, administrators, and they all have different needs and wants within that domain. So our master setting will always be at our organization level, so at our school level. And our master setting is on. What I want to do is shut this off for, let's say, alumni. So alumni don't have contacts. You click on alumni, you click on override, and we can slide this bar by clicking it and it slides off. And then you click apply. And it's letting us know that we're turning off contacts for users in that alumni OU. We're going to click on turn off. And now we should see that the master setting is on. But for alumni, it's been overridden, and if we click on that, it's off. And now when we close out of this little pop-up, it should show us that contacts are no longer on for everyone, but on for some organizations. So going back to our slide deck, organization units or OUs are so, so important for being able to manage different domain settings at a subgroup level. Now, on the flip side, Google Groups it's usually confusing because you would think a group is an OU and an OU is a group and vice versa, but that's not the case. Google Groups are what you would think of if you use Outlook a lot as a listserv. So a Google Group is what you're able to do, and you can take a subset of users, put them into a Google Group, and then you're able to email these users, share them on documents, invite them to a calendar event. And instead of having to do all these things individually, you can do it with a large group of people. And Google Groups also has its own setting within, or its own area within the admin console, just like organizational units does. So if I go back to my admin console very quickly, if I click on my little hamburger menu and I go down, I see groups. So there's lots of different types of groups you can have. You can change the email address of these groups, and you can change the type of group that it is. So the Caitlin test group right now has 0 users. We can change our access settings by looking at this, and it takes us out to our groups. So it lets us control who can contact the group, who the members are, who the email addresses are, and it really allows us to kind of change a lot of different settings for these groups, and then it allows us to really easily invite them to things. So if I wanted to invite my test group to this, I can just find my test group email address, and instead of having to invite a bunch of different users, I can just go back to my slide deck and invite that one test group. This is really useful. Most schools create Google Groups for staff, for students, for their senior class, let's say. And Google Groups are useful because you can have different types of users within one group. So let's say you have an English teacher and they want to create a Google Group just of their Shakespeare class. Now, normally, if you're doing that in an organizational unit, your teacher and your students are going to be in different organizational units, right? Because they have different, they have different settings applied to them. When you're using a group, you can have these different users from different OUs inside of one Google group. So that teacher can be in a group with his 30 students and know that if he needs to contact them or share them in on any materials or add them to, let's say, a Google Classroom, it's really easy to do because we have those groups set up. So, excuse me for my little rant on organizational units versus Google Groups, but I think that that's a very important distinction to understand when you're both setting up and managing a domain. And if you want to, there's so much help on Google's support site regarding groups versus organizational units, especially in regards to how to set your groups up. That'll be very, very useful for you moving forward. So if we go back to our domain audit tool, right now I can say that I know the difference between a group and an organizational unit, and I'm going to mark that as completed. Notice when I mark it as completed, it allows me to, it changes to that nice green, so I feel like I've accomplished something. And what's also great is you can also filter by status. So let's say I know that I've done part of my audit, but I kind of want to take a second and just look at things that I've not started. I can filter out completed and then only see the things that have not yet started. So let's just take 1 second. I'm going to unfilter these columns so we can take a look back at the audit as a whole. Okay. All right, now let's just go through a few more of these checkpoints just so that we understand what we're dealing with as we go through this domain audit together. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. I've already covered line items 2 and 3. I'm going to change them to not yet started for myself. Line item 4 is knowing how to deactivate a user account versus deleting it. Because you're all on Google Apps for Education domains, you have unlimited storage. So we suggest, especially when it comes to dealing with user drive contents, that you never delete users mid-year if they're leaving the school. You rather suspend them, which is different than deletion, because it allows you to make sure that you're not losing any of the drive content that that person may own. So let's go to our admin console, and let's say that I want to take a look at my users and I want to suspend someone. So we'll go to our users in that menu. And here under UPD, we should see all of our different users. Or if I want to go to one of my sub-orgs, let's say I want to look at my demo organization, I can see all my demo users. Or I want to go to my test OU, which should have no one in it. And there's no one in here. You currently have no active users in this organization. So let's say I want to go to my non-active students. Let's go to active students. So let's take a look in here. And let's say Kai Moore, I want to suspend this user. So if you go all the way to, there's 2 ways that you can do this. You can do this directly from when you're in your OU. you should be able to click on these 3 dots and go to suspend user. It gives you a bunch of different options for this. It gives you a reset password option, which is incredibly useful as a domain administrator. The rename user option, if someone, let's say, gets married or decides they want to go by a nickname. Delete user, suspend user, and email user. So let's say I want to suspend Kai. I can click on suspend, and it tells me this user will not be able to log in, access services, or receive invites, right? Our user license fees still apply to suspended users, but because you're in a Google Apps for Education domain, you have more or less unlimited user licenses. So you don't need to worry about license fees because you're not paying for the license fees. So suspending versus deleting is never an option, is never an issue, rather. So I'm going to say I want to suspend this user. And it's going to change that user for me from never logged in to suspended. So right now I'm only looking at my active students. What I want to do here is take a look at who is suspended. We want to go to user type and then go to suspended users. So see, we're just seeing our Kai Moore, who we just suspended, is now no longer coming up in our active users pool, but is coming up rather in our suspended users pool. So that means that Kai may have left the school, so Kai can no longer log into anything, they can no longer access anything in their Google domain, but as an admin user, I still have access to their Drive content, which is especially important if you have a teacher leave mid-year. Let's say you have your math chair leaves unexpectedly mid-year. You don't want to lose any of the items that they may have created in their Google Drive or any calendars that they may own, any Google groups that they might manage. You don't want to lose access to any of this. So you always want to suspend users. And then if you want to, in between school years during the summer, you can do general cleanup and delete users if need be. If you guys ever do end up deleting a user, just know that if you go ahead and click on this and you go to delete user, it should ask you before you delete if you want to transfer the data associated with this user. This is something that's super important because, like I said, the worst thing to have happen is to lose a bunch of Drive content. So what you want to do is these 2 things are already checked for you, so you shouldn't have to do anything. And you can go ahead and assign a new owner for this data, and it's going to transfer data from that user to a new owner. So you can put in the new owner, and it should let you transfer data and delete account. Okay, so that's something that if you ever do delete a user, like we said, this should never happen unless it's the end of the school year or during the summer. That is what would happen for you. So what else are some things that we should go through? Line item 6, the school principal has a user account with a super admin privilege. This is really important for you all. Even if principals may not necessarily be the domain administrators at your school, you still want to make sure the principal has super admin access. As principal, they should have access to anything within the admin console. They should know how to get to the admin console, and they should generally understand more or less the different parts of it. They may not need to know it as in-depth as a domain administrator should, but the principal should have an idea of what you can and cannot do within the admin console. If you ever want to look to see the different permissions that users have, on your admin console, there's a section called admin roles. When we go to admin roles, it automatically takes us to our super admin section. Super admin are users who have access to every single function in the domain. So there's 2 different tabs here. We have admins, and it's showing us who our admin users are. And then we have privileges. If we click on privileges, it shows us what a super admin role privilege is. And notice that every single item that we have here is checked. We have Chrome management, we have shared devices, the Google Apps vault, etc. Every single permission that you could possibly have is a permission that a super admin would have. So we suggest at the very, very least, and then again, this is another checkpoint item on our domain audit tool, is that these 2, 5, and 6. We want to make sure that, number 1, our principal has a super admin account. Number 2, our domain administrator has a super admin account. And number 3, that we suggest you create a generic systems or user account at your school. And I say this for 2 reasons. Number 1, you want to make sure that you have access to your admin panel through a user that's not necessarily a real person. This is incredibly important, especially if, let's say, the principal leaves and your one domain administrator forgets his password, or vice versa. Your domain administrator leaves and the principal forgets their password. Who's going to be able to access the admin console? If you only had those 2 super admin, no one. So we suggest you always create a generic user account, and it could be systems@myschool.org or admin@myschool.org or generic superadmin@myschool.org. It doesn't matter what you name this person, but it is important that you create a generic login and give that generic user super admin access. This is also very important, especially when I do a lot of work with affinity schools and they occasionally need help with their domain. I never want to log into a school's domain as a real user. I do not want access to someone's username and their password. But if a school has that generic super admin account in place, all I need to do is log into that generic account, and there you go. I have access to their super admin, to their admin console, and I'm able to see what's going on. I'm able to assist them with any issues. So that's another checkpoint that's on our domain audit. It's very important for you guys to understand. If you notice underneath these systems roles also, you see that there are different types of admin roles. So super admin, like we said, have every possible access point in your admin account. But if we look at something called a groups admin, so we don't have anyone assigned here right now, no administrators present, under privileges, these people can read organizational units, they can read users, and they have access to Google Groups. So a groups admin is someone basically who's responsible for maintaining and updating the Google Groups, because Google Groups are such that if anyone ever leaves or enters the organization, these groups are managed separately from user accounts. And then we have that user management admin, which is important. They can read organizational units and they can add and update users, which is really, really important. Again, if you have a very large school and you maybe want to delegate some responsibility, you can make it such that maybe your secretary is the user management person. So they know who comes and goes from the school on a daily basis, and they're the ones that are creating or suspending user accounts. Help desk admin is more appropriate for a work domain and not necessarily a Google Apps for Education domain, but it's still available here. And the same for a services admin. User creator roles are also really important. As a domain administrator, you can create your own customized admin role. So right now we have one that's created. It's a Vault admin. This is another checkpoint on our list. Create a special role called Google Apps Vault Admin and assign appropriate users in the organization to the role. This is important because as a Google Apps for Education domain, you all have access to Google Vault. Google Vault is where any and all of your school's digital record is kept, and it is kept there indefinitely. Google Vault is especially important if there's ever any issues or questions of something that's happened online. You can always get a transcript of someone's email or a chat or their Drive contents through this Google Vault. So we suggest that you create a user-created role that is specifically for Vault access, and all the privileges this person has are just related to Google Vault. So notice how nothing is checked, but if I look in Google Vault, all of these options are checked. So you want to check View All Matters, and we want to click Save to make sure that that is saved also. And we suggest that in terms of admin, your principal is assigned to this Google Apps Vault admin role. Again, we know that we're saying that the principal should have super admin access, which is important, but you also want to explicitly show that the principal has access to all of this Vault content. And if you want to see, Google Vault is an option within your admin console. So if I go to Apps, because Google Vault is considered a Google application, if I go under Google Apps, we find Google Apps Vault. This should always be on for everyone. And like I said, this is another checkpoint on our list. Let's find that right now. Here we go. Google Vault we have a checkpoint to make sure that Google Vault is turned on for the domain and that the Google Vault email retention policy is set to retain data indefinitely. So you always want to make sure Google Apps is on for everyone. And I want to click into this e-discovery link, which is going to give me access to Google Vault. And I want to look at retention. Notice how this kind of looks like our Gmail, but a little different. Our retention policy is to retain data indefinitely. That should always be the case for Google Vault, and that's why we give you all, we give you all a specific link, or a specific checkpoint that tells you such. Let's go through some more of these checkpoints. Let's see. These are all pretty specific checkpoints, and like I said, we suggest that, here's a great one to talk about. We suggest that your staff organizational unit has a FERPA boilerplate compliance footer. This is basically a footer that you should see at most, you should see on most email signatures that go outside of your domain. It should say this email message is for the sole use of the intended recipient and may contain confidential and privileged information. And there's a way to just copy and paste this notice that we provide you right into your Gmail settings in your admin console. And anytime someone sends an email outside of your school's domain, this little notice will be attached. And if we go over and you say, why do we need that? That seems unnecessarily long. Do we have to put that at the end of every email? The rationale for this setting from us is that outbound emails may inadvertently contain student records as a result of user error. This helps inform the recipient that they're legally responsible to notify the sender in case of the error and that further disclosure is illegal. Okay? And it's also important that we don't need to put this on students. We only need to do this for staff. And again, this is where those organizational units come into play. So if I go to my admin console and I go to Google Apps and I say, I want to add that footer, I want to go to Gmail and I'm going to go to advanced settings because when I'm looking at the domain audit, it's telling me I should be going to settings for Gmail, advanced settings, then I'm going to compliance. So I'm in here. Notice how once I go to advanced settings, I'm not necessarily in my compliance setting yet, right? Compliance is a little bit further down. It's right here. It lets me pick which organizational unit I want to be doing all of these changes for. So right now, I'm in UPD. It's showing me that it's in gray. I'm in UPD. I want to go down to staff and say, I only want to do this setting for staff, so I only need to look at staff. And notice that it takes me to compliance, and under append footer, I already have a footer there. And it's that notice. So, like we said, we try to make this as easy for you guys as possible, but it's really important that you do understand the rationale behind a lot of these settings. Then we have some settings for these Google Apps sites, Talk and Hangout. We have Drive and calendar settings. Also, it's important for you guys to remember it's not necessarily the easiest thing to remember, but a lot of these settings that you're going to be looking at in your domain are going to fall under apps. Google Apps are things that like Drive and Gmail and calendars and contacts and Google Sites. Google Apps are anything that you're using Google for that they consider to be an application. So if we look at Google Apps, this is where a lot of these settings that need to be configured at an OU level are going to be housed. Excuse me. So we have calendar, classroom, contacts, Drive, Gmail, sites, and they're all in here in alphabetical order. And you can see at a quick glance what the Google Apps are and the status. We have on for everyone, on for select orgs, on for everyone, always on, etc. And if you ever want to change those really quickly, you click on these three dots, and that's how you get that done. If we go back to our domain audit tool, let's see, what else? If you guys have students under the age of 13, which is important for our elementary school focused schools, you're going to want to make sure if you're providing students, and this is something that we're going to go over in our next Hangout, you're going to want to make sure that for students under the age of 13, you're getting parental consent for them to use their email addresses. This is really important because you need to be COPA compliant. And again, this is something that we'll go over in later sessions, but we provide you with a checkpoint on the audit here because we believe that it's that important, that it's something that you need to think about and go over kind of before you even provide these student email addresses. And to that extent, if you look at this line item 62, we also suggest that you guys get signatures on a FERPA affidavit for your teachers who are using their email accounts. And we provide you in the findings column with a copy of a form that you can use to kind of, in lieu of actual teacher signatures, if you just get teachers to sign off on this digital form, it should provide the same accountability. But you just want to have something on file that says teachers understand why they're using these Gmail, these Google Apps for Education, these Gmail email addresses, and that they are the same thing as using their school's email address and they need to take care. We have some security settings down toward the bottom, then we have these user settings. At the bottom, line items 72 and 73 speak on CloudLock. CloudLock is a third-party application that our affinity schools use and that any schools can use to kind of prevent inappropriate sharing of student data, of teacher data, etc. CloudLock is something that if you're in your admin console, it's also considered an app, but it's considered a marketplace application because it's something that you're getting that is not through Google. And CloudLock is basically this great system that allows you to put certain settings in place at a domain level that are really useful. It's especially useful for monitoring student email. So CloudLock has a policy that explicitly states that more or less any sort of profanity under the sun they've accounted for, and if anyone uses one of those words in an email, in a chat, etc., you can set it to have that email be rejected or have the email rerouted to your administrator rather than who the intended recipient was. CloudLock's really great in helping you to further protect students and staff within your domain in ways that Google currently cannot. So if you all want, we provide you with this add CloudLock and configure your CloudLock settings if you want to. We provide you with information on why CloudLock is useful and for some documentation regarding that. So let's very quickly take a look at our elementary school focus tab. Like I said, secondary school and elementary school focus tabs are more or less identical, except we have a few different settings for secondary school versus elementary. The first being that we want all core Google services turned on for faculty or staff. Core Google services are those Google apps that we were referring to. In secondary school, we suggest that all core Google apps are turned on for both students and staff. But in elementary school, we leave it up to the school's discretion to decide whether or not they want these apps turned on for students. Since students are younger, they may not be using all of these applications. What's another change? We suggest that you may want to restrict delivery configuration for your emails. So in elementary schools, you may want students to use their email, but you may want them to only use it within the domain, and there's an easy way to set that up, and we provide you with that information here. Again, for secondary schools, we suggest that students be allowed to use their email and email whoever they like. There's a way to configure, like I was just saying, to configure it so that there's certain words and phrases that aren't in those emails, but we suggest that you leave the option to use email on for secondary schools. So let's see, line item 51 is another change. In elementary schools, we suggest that the ability to create a Google site is turned on for staff only, whereas in secondary schools, we suggest that Google sites be turned on for both students and staff. Let's see, and we also suggest the restriction of chat invitations. Again, Google Chat is another part of the Google domain. We suggest that you restrict that for students in an elementary school, but not necessarily for students within a secondary school. And here are some more changes for passwords and your organizational structure. We suggest for schools that may be elementary and middle to separate out their student OUs so that you have active students elementary and active students middle, that you're actually separating those two groups of users out, again, so that you can make sure that their settings are configured correctly based on the organizational unit, because elementary school students may have less that they need access to than middle school students. Yeah, and those are really the only major differences between the secondary and the elementary middle school tabs. What else did we want to talk about? I think that is pretty much all that we need to cover today. I would say to go through that domain audit, really get a feel for the different checkpoints and the rationale behind each checkpoint, and make sure the domain audit's great because it also really helps you understand your admin console. The admin console sometimes changes, but more or less it is staying the same for Google. They occasionally will change, whether or not something is available at an entire school level or an OU, but for the most part, Google keeps things pretty much unchanged. So I would say that this, if anything, the domain audit is going to be very useful for you to A, make sure that your settings are in place correctly, and that B, you're just making sure that kind of everything is intelligible within your domain. Especially as a domain administrator, these things can get really confusing and difficult, and it's just good to be able to sit and understand what your admin console is and what's available for you to do in here. Thank you all so much for listening to me today. Like I said, we do have a few more Hangouts on Air coming up. I'm going to copy and paste this document into the comment section of the YouTube link. So if you guys want to follow CloudLab on YouTube, you should be able to have access to all this information. We have another Hangout on Air coming up next week on drive sharing, FERPA responsibilities, and Cloud Lock, which we were just discussing earlier. Then we have another one the 17th on student account tools, which is an overview of the CloudLab add-ons that we've created to help New York City public schools better be able to manage and create student user accounts. And then at the beginning of March, we have our final Hangout on Air on extending the power of GAFE with add-ons. And these are, again, more add-ons that we're going to talk about that we've created that makes kind of using Google a little bit easier. So like I said, thank you all so much, and I'll leave this page up for a little bit. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll go back to our GAFE highlights. I will actually copy and paste this into our GAFE highlight deck so that, I'll copy and paste this into our GAFE highlight deck for this session so that you all have access to it. I'll put it right here under our short URL. But if you do want access to this slide deck, again, it's bit.ly/GAFE session 2. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you all next week. Have a good one.